More reactions to the Ukraine crisis in response to Moscow recognizing the two rebel regions in Ukraine. The White House says that the US will announce new sanctions against Russia, which it will coordinate with its allies and partners later today. President Joe Biden earlier signed an executive order to prohibit trade and investment between US individuals and the two breakaway regions. Included is the prohibition of a new investment by an American wherever located and the importation into the United States directly or indirectly of any goods, services or technology from the covered regions. Meanwhile, at the emergency meeting of the UN Security Council, China's ambassador to the UN called all parties concerned in the Ukraine crisis to exercise restraint and avoid any action that might fuel tensions, adding that Beijing welcomed and encouraged every effort for a diplomatic solution to the crisis. Let's put this all in perspective. Our US Bureau Chief Nirmal Ghosh is here and he's in Singapore at the moment. Nirmal, where does China stand on the Ukraine crisis? We saw a new closeness between Presidents Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping just weeks ago at the Beijing's Winter Olympics.
Yes, we saw that. And by the way, there is a school of thought in the United States, mostly in conservative policy circles, that the US must not allow the relationship with Russia to become so adversarial because Russia and the US should be on the same side eventually against China. But be that as it may, China has been saying Europe and the United States must acknowledge Vladimir Putin's point of view. But more recently, in video remarks at the 58th Munich Security Conference, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi said Ukraine should serve as a communication bridge between the East and West instead of a frontier for contestation. He said countries should reject the idea of exclusive or absolute security and guard against a new Cold War. He did say that Russia's reasonable security concerns should be respected. And on Monday, at an emergency UN Security Council meeting, China's ambassador said all parties concerned must exercise restraint and avoid any action that may fuel tensions. He said, we welcome and encourage every effort for a diplomatic solution. So in essence, it seems that China has settled on a strategy to oppose a Russian invasion of Ukraine on principle, while continuing to blame the United States and its allies for hyping the threat from Russia and for misunderstanding Vladimir Putin's security concerns. This serves its interest, which is not to align too closely with Russia and draw even more hostility from US-led Western powers, while maintaining the principle of opposing any country's interference in another country's internal affairs.
Nirmal, tensions have been escalating between Russia and Ukraine for some time now. What is Mr. Putin's strategy, you think, and why might Russia invade Ukraine?
Yes, well, now in reality, he has bitten off a chunk of eastern Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk, where Russia has had assets inside for a long time. So that is really not that new, but it is a forward consolidation and it does raise the threat to the rest of Ukraine. This problem has a long history. Its roots go back to the disintegration of the old Soviet Union and the eastward expansion of NATO. In the north, for example, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, the Baltic states, were once part of the Soviet Union, but since 2004 have been members of NATO and the European Union. And in 2008, NATO welcomed what it called the aspiration of Ukraine to join that alliance. But that is a clear red line for Moscow, because if Ukraine joins NATO, that would bring NATO forces and NATO missiles right up to Russia's border with Ukraine. It would be a bit like Russia putting missiles in Cuba. Of course, NATO is a defensive alliance, but that does not cut much ice in Moscow if the alliance continues to creep up to Russia's borders, leaving no buffers. That is Russia's point of view. Now, Vladimir Putin wants a commitment that Ukraine will never become a part of NATO, but Ukraine's current regime does not want to give such a commitment, neither does the US and its NATO allies. And Vladimir Putin is using all this specifically that 2008 Bucharest statement as an excuse and an opportunity to enforce his red line. Russia sees a neutral or pro-Russia Ukraine as a core security issue. It sees a pro-West Ukraine as a security threat. And as we know, as you said, this has been going on for a long time. Ukraine is contested, and Vladimir Putin may see this as an opportunity to make a decisive move and finish this problem once and for all. Or he may stop at taking this chunk of Ukraine to show that he is serious and not go ahead with a full-scale invasion. Now, this has become a contest, a relapse of the Cold War proxy contest between Russia and the United States. It is possible that Putin will not invade the rest of Ukraine, and that would allow him to keep this chunk of territory, to extend his security sphere, perimeter, so to speak, and also not incur the wider sanctions threatened by the US and its European allies. In Washington, those sanctions are still being threatened if he invades the rest of Ukraine. The US does not consider sending Russian forces into these two eastern areas as an invasion of the entire country, again, because Russia has had assets in there for a while already.
Nirmal, thank you for your perspectives. US Bureau Chief Nirmal Ghosh.